Hello and welcome to another episode of Learn to Code Academy. In this episode, we're going to be looking at programming Xbox 360 controller support for your native .NET C# application. Now, with this, you may be wondering, why do I need 360 support for a native .NET C# application? Well, let's say, for example, you want to create a video game or some sort of interactive experience in your program, in your C# program. You may opt for some sort of peripheral device like a PC controller to work in tandem with your program. And so it may come in handy to learn how to do this. And there is a solution that I found some time ago. I actually tried to create a game. I didn't get around to finishing it, but I still got quite a decent way into the back end in terms of the controller support. I managed to get Xbox 360 controller support up and running 100%. And the code is still here. The legacy code is still here. So I'm going to run through a little bit of this code and sort of explain what's going on. So before we begin, you're going to need to, of course, start your C#.NET application. This is a WPF application, and I will highly recommend you start off with a WPF application. If you don't know how to do that already, you just press File at the top left, New Project, and then you can go ahead and create your .NET WPF application. Excuse me. So, what you're going to need is something called SlimDX. It's a dependency. And so you won't be able to really see this because it's off screen, but I'll describe it to you. If you go on Tools, on the top part of your menu, okay, you probably see the drop down, and you go to Nuget Package Manager, and then you click on Manage Nuget Packages for Solution. You have access to the Nuget Packages Solution window, and here you can browse for all sorts of plugins that you can put into your project to, enhance what you're doing and save you the effort of actually creating all sorts of code that you may need. So go ahead and search for SlimDX. And I've already got SlimDX installed. This is SlimDX. It's a free open source framework that enables developers to easily build DirectX applications using .NET technologies such as C#, VB.NET, and IronPython. Go ahead and click that, tick it into your app, and then install it. Mine's already installed, so that's why it says uninstalled. So you just go ahead and install. Okay? So once you've gone ahead and done that, I'm going to just describe what I did here. And if you want to name your classes similarly to mine, go for it if it helps. But as long as you get the idea of what I've done, it may differ depending on what application you're doing. But I hope by the end of this tutorial you at least understand how to use this plugin the way I used it to actually create the 360 support. So let's dive right in. I have here a class called controller input parser. Now, firstly, you're going to need a namespace. You're going to need the using SlimDX direct input namespace, which comes after you've installed the SlimDX plugin. So go ahead and add that dependency, that namespace. Now, this class I designed to handle with all inputs of the controller. So I look at the analog stick and the face buttons to be, just to generalize. So where do I begin here? Start with creating a list right here. The list is here. SlimDX direct input joystick is the type. I called it sticks buttons, and I'm instantiating it on this line as well. I'm not going to boast that this code is the most organized in the whole world, but I will say it will hopefully at least demonstrate the concept so that you can go ahead and make your own 360 support. So anyway, go ahead and instantiate that at the top if you wish, or you can declare it, instantiate it at the constructor, but it will more or less do the same thing. I have here an array called buttons. Oh, and by the way, there are probably hundreds of ways to do this better. I wrote this quite a while ago, but again, I hope it still helps. Anyway, buttons array. Go ahead and, okay, here I've created many fields, which you'll see soon, and I also gave them corresponding properties. So that's why it tells me in IntelliSense to use auto properties. instead. It's just it's good for if you want to configure events to your button inputs to have corresponding properties to your fields. And that's what I've done here with some of these fields. So I also have a class called controller calibrator, and I'm going to get back to why this is here. For now, don't worry about this field. We're going to worry about the functionality of the controllers. So go ahead, you can create a private int called y-axis, x-axis, and you can probably more or less guess what that's for. A button, which is a boolean, I've set to default or false. The X button, false boolean as well. The Y button, the B buttons, the L button, the R button, they're all booleans or false. The left stick button is also false. The right stick button is false. The start button is false boolean. Back button is finally a false boolean. Now, we're gonna need a dispatcher timer. And so I declare a dispatcher timer which controls the listening intervals of the controller to read inputs. So we're going to need some sort of timer to sort of dictate the clock speed, if I may sort of analogize like that, the clock speed of the listener, how fast it's listening to the button intervals that's being input. So go ahead and create a dispatcher timer. You can declare it like I've done so here. And also you need some more fields. So you need a direct input. You need to declare a direct input class. And this comes from the slimdx namespace. And I called it input and I instantiated it. You're also going to need a slimdx.directinput.joystick and I've named it stick. I've done the same thing, but I've called it stick button. And I've made a couple arrays here as well of joystick. And I've called this sticks, joystick, I've called this stick buttons. Now, we need to know the value of the buttons once they're clicked. So once a button is clicked, how do we dictate, its value on and off and such? The way I did it here in this, on the time I wrote this code, I went ahead and I created an int of a y value. I named it y value, and I gave it a default of 0. And an int x value, default of 0. Also, I have a boolean here called controller inputted, and I've equals it to false, or I've assigned it to false rather. And a controller inputted a, I've assigned to false. And I've done so for all the other, actually, just the face buttons. So A, B, X, and Y. Now, we're down to the constructor. All right, so in the constructor, I instantiated the controller calibrator. You can go ahead and create a class called controller calibrator, actually. You know what? This is going to be useful later. So what you're going to do, go ahead, go to your project in the Solution Explorer, add, new item. It's just going to take a little while to load. And create a new, well, for me, the controller calibrator is actually not just a class. It is a window, actually. It is a WPF window. Because I used, basically what this does is this visualizes the controller on screen. I created a visualizer so that I can actually debug, if I need to, the controller to test that it actually works. So this is actually very important. So go ahead and create a window of WPF. Call it controller, what is it? Controller calibrator. Or name it whatever you want, but mine is called controller calibrator. And then you can add that. I don't need to because I already have one. And so now this will make sense. So now you instantiate controller calibrator. And just to note on that, my computer is frozen. Here we are. If you go back up, the very first thing I did, or actually the third thing I declared, was controller calibrator. So go ahead and declare that first in your fields, where you write your fields, and then instantiate it in your constructor. So now, this controller calibrator reference Where did I actually write this? I must have declared it at the top, right? Let me go to definitions. Oh, it's a property. Okay, no problem. And it corresponds to a field that I created. Okay, so it might be worth me showing you the field, the properties. So before we continue with the constructor, let's look at the properties because the properties correspond with the fields. So yes, public controller calibrator reference. This is a property and this is how I've written it out. I have its getter and a setter. So when I get the value, I return this field, controller calibrator. And when I want to set the value of this property, it sets it, it assigns it towards the field controller calibrator. And I do this for most of my fields, all the corresponding ones, the ones that need to. So I have one for y-axis, and you can see there. I'll just scroll down slowly. You can feel free to pause the video to look at whatever you need to. You can observe. I've got for A button field, the B button field, X button property assigned corresponding to the X button field. Same for the Y button, L button, and I'll just scroll slowly so you can see. R button, left stick, right stick, start button has a property, back button has a property, and then here's the methods. So before we go to the methods, now that we've covered the properties, let's go back to the constructor. So in the constructor, I already spoke about the controller calibrator reference. Now, joysticks. So go ahead and instantiate an array called joystick. Actually, what am I doing here? Sorry, no, I'm assigning joystick, this array, to the value of get joystick. Now you're going to get an error when you write this bit here. Get stick, because we haven't made the method yet, but we'll go over that. Just write it now. Write it for now. So I'm sure get stick returns a value, and I'm calling it here for some reason. That might not make sense, because if it returns a value, then I probably don't need to call it here discreetly. But for now, let's put it there, because mind you, I did write this a while ago, so maybe there's a reason for that. Anyway, also sticks, I assigned it the value of get stick, the same method. And now we're dealing with the timer. So here, controller timer is equal to a new dispatcher timer. So I'm instantiating my dispatcher timer, which doesn't make sense because I think I instantiated already, but hey ho. Also, I'm assigning a new event handler, which is hooked to a method called controller timer underscore tick. So that will give you an error, this line, once you write it in, because you haven't created this method yet, but we will do so, or you will do so if you follow this tutorial respectively. So don't worry too much about that. And of course, the interval is assigned here, and I gave it a time span of 1, which I think what does that correspond to? A millisecond? Let me see. It corresponds to a tick. Okay, and 1 tick is 100 nanoseconds. Oh, that's quite fast, isn't it? So 100 nanoseconds right there. And I started the controller timer. So the dispatcher's timer starts upon boot up of the program. Okay, we're making more progress here. So we've already covered properties, so we can go ahead and scroll past all this. Now, get stick. Remember the get stick method that would have given you the error if you wrote it down? Now we're going to write it out. So, in the get stick method, right here I instantiate a list of type slimdx direct input joystick, and it's called sticks. And it is assigned the value, it's just instantiated a new list. Okay, I won't describe everything that's going on here, but what I'm gonna do is let you observe it. I'll give you some time to look at it right there. This is a for each loop, of course. So go ahead and observe this for each loop. Pause the video if you need to. I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. And yes, and let me scroll down now. So, and then of course I return a value because it's not a void method. I return something. And I also have this line here, sticks.toArray, sticks button, excuse me, sticks buttons.toArray. So that's a method. And then you can go ahead and close that method. Now we have another one. Now this is kind of fun. This method, stick handle, handles the button mapping of the controller. So it seems really important, doesn't it? So, okay, this is another long one. So basically, hold tight, people. Right. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to explain everything here. You just want results, I'm sure. So you want to know what's going on. Go ahead and put in some parameters here of type joystick and type int. Give them names. I called mine stick and ID. And now, this code you can write. Before this if statement, we have some declarations and assignments going on here. So I'll just highlight that for you. Feel free to pause the video again. So we have joystick state. State has been assigned a value. Y and X values have been assigned certain properties from state, and the buttons, and we have also X, Y, and Z axis being assigned. So now, button IDs. This part of the program will check button IDs so that the program knows what button has been pressed. So, and this is really interesting because you can do certain things upon button pressing. You know, if it's a general application, a general video game you're trying to create, then you want your buttons to generally work in a general sense. So, you know, if you press A button in a menu, you want to follow the menu, for example. But if you press A button in-game, you might want to jump. So you don't want to put a jump algorithm here because it won't make it general purpose. But what you can put is a flag that tells the program that the A button has been pressed. So if the first element of the buttons array is true, then execute all of this. So it will know that the A button is pressed, and A button will be assigned to true, and controller inputted A will be assigned to true. Otherwise, if controller inputted is equal to true, this controller inputted A is equal to false, and this A button is equal to false, or assigned a value of false. So hopefully you generally understand what's going on here. So it's basically wash, rinse, and repeat. So I will just slowly scroll down for you. Feel free to pause the video at any point. So from 0, 1, 2, 3. This basically covers all the face buttons and I believe shoulder buttons as well, including start and back buttons for Xbox 360. I even put some debug code there at the time to let myself know that I pressed certain buttons. If I press the R stick, if I push the stick to the right and stuff like that. This bit is quite interesting. Okay, this looks at the axis of the analog stick. Upon just a brief look at this, every analog value of the analog stick reads a particular value. So I wrote here, if the axis X is between -2 and 2 and satisfies the condition that the y-axis is in between -2 and 2, execute all of this code. And it basically means that I'm idle. I'm not moving the controller. Okay? So I put a little bit of leeway there because obviously I could have said assigned a value of 0, check it against a value of 0, being the controller being center. But let's say, for example, the controller the user is using is a little bit old, and so there's a bit of an offset. You know, maybe the controller leans towards the right by half a degree, 2 degrees or something. So I've got a little bit of leeway here by having the range of -2 and 2, -2 and 2. You can play with these values, you know, you can experiment with these values depending on what sort of window of leeway you want for your application. If you want to create a game, for example, that has tighter controls, this window will be very small, especially if it's a 3D game you're attempting to create. That'd be cool. It will have or some sort of 3D-esque game. This will be a really tight window. But if you want the controls to be very loose, you know, to have a very loose feel, I can say maybe like as if you're driving a car, that kind of loose kind of feel. This will be a bigger window. This will be a much bigger window. That's just from off the top of my head. And so if we carry on going down, I now say if the axis X is greater than 2, so basically if I'm moving the stick towards the right, then do as follows. And I will just keep scrolling down, and hopefully you kind of understand what's going on here. Okay, this last one looks a bit interesting. Oh, is that correct? Oh, okay, must be. Okay, and then we keep going, and then I do the same for the y-axis. So if the y-axis is being moved up, or in this case down, sometimes you might need to mess with this with the values to know, well, as long as you assign, because sometimes it may be reversed for some reason. X might be Y, Y might be X. It might be mirrored, I'm not too sure. There might even be a property that mirrors it. I'm not too sure, I haven't explored it that deep. But in any case, if y-axis is greater than 2, it means I'm moving down according to my derelict code, my derelict message box.show code here. I'm just going by that. I really should be up, right? I don't know. I haven't tested this in a while. I'm going to create a separate video for the testing aspect of this. So this video will just look at this class, but there is one more class we'll look at, which is the controller calibrator. And so that corresponds with what we've done here. So feel very free to watch that video as well, because it'll be quite important for your visualizer. And also, of course, you're going to probably have 1 or 2 errors right now if you haven't created that class yet or haven't coded it properly, because we did make a call to that class, not function, a class. And finally, the last method, public void controller timer underscore tick. Yes, this is just the event for the controller timer. So go ahead and put this for loop, and that should be okay. So this is the first part of the video series for Xbox 360 controller support. I hope it's made some sense. I hope it shed some light on the SlimDX plugin and how you can use this to create Xbox 360 controller support. In the next video, I'm going to go over the controller calibrator. I'm going to talk about how that works for the visualizer, because it's a XAML, it's a .xaml.cs file, which means that it's got the GUI component. I'll just quickly show you now. When on runtime, this is centered, but basically this is sort of the socket of the analog stick, and this is the analog stick itself, and it kind of moves around the socket. So I'll show that working in a subsequent video. And yes, so I hope this has been a helpful video. Feel free to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe if you wish. And I hope that you tune in for more. So have a great day, guys, and God bless. See you later.